Hello there, Sir from 17 once again. This is my ReCore walkthrough. This is mission 6, and it's a culmination of Lockdown, Cavern Rush, and Access Granted. So in this video you're going to see a multitude of ReCore gameplay. You'll notice I'm taking on some standard enemies here, just to get some cores, and that leads me to the inventory discussion that I probably should have had at this point, but the game hasn't really afforded me the luxury. Because the missions are quite quick, and these videos are flying by. If you're curious of how many there are in their entire series, there are 26, because I finished editing them a moment ago. But the inventory in this game is another one of those moments where ReCore proves that it does not really care about the convenience and the fun of the player. And it sucks because the inventory system as itself I think is great. You have capacity for items, which will then be upgrading the components on your companions. You also have the cores, which are extracted from the enemies, which go towards powering up the statistical benefits of your buddies. So you'll notice the game is incredibly focused on your companions, and that's a good thing because they add what little depth the game has, because they enable you to have an additional attack and an additional offense, which, when it comes together with the shooting and the affinity systems, it does add up to something that is more entertaining than it would have been without them. So they're a welcome addition, and I'm glad they exist, but the inventory fills far too quickly, and I don't know if there is a way to expand it, because in my time with the game, which admittedly, I've only played this game for about maybe 10 hours, something like that, I haven't seen it, I haven't seen the capacity for it. I've seen a lot of things, but that wasn't one of them. So what will happen is you'll get to these wonderful situations where you fill your inventory, and because this game has such punishing load times, it puts you in a position where you want to play the game as much as possible without facing these awkward, awful moments of just nothing. And unless you've got a phone or a portable gaming device or something to distract yourself with, like emails or checking the internet or watching television or however it is that you pass the time when you're in a loading screen that's a little bit egregious, it's just, it really takes the momentum out of the step of the game and out of your will to play it. And I find myself in those load times just kind of thinking, I don't know how they thought that this was okay. And you get to a point where I could have easily turned it off, and I was going to turn it off rather angrily, and it wasn't because the game was bad, and it wasn't because I was raging because I was bad at the game. It was because there's this barrier to the game, and it never goes away. And there are moments where they're slightly quicker, there are some instances where they're very quick, and you can't help but feel like, that was perfect, why isn't everything like that? But the game never ever will be that way unless you play on PC, and this game was sold essentially as a console exclusive, as a Microsoft exclusive. This is one of the titles that's going to help Microsoft win this console generation, and it just isn't gonna do that, because not only is it eclectic as fuck, and, you know, if this is your type of great game, then awesome, but there's a majority of people that probably don't remember that classic N64/PlayStation 1 era of these kind of games, and have no concept of what this is. They might think it's like FIFA with guns. You don't know, because you can never understand what, you know, the average gamer thinks. And I think a lot of people misconstrue what an average gamer is, which is one of the reasons I quite enjoy it when Darkside Phil brings it up so much, because the average gamer isn't somebody who buys 5 games a year. The average gamer probably buys 1 and barely plays that. You know, that's your average gamer. There's a lot of people who play games in a recreational sense, and they treat it the same way that they do something like alcohol, where they'll do it on a weekend and that's it. You know, not everybody gets pissed every night. Some do, and you would call them rather, you know, core/hardcore drinkers. But not everybody is of that ilk. And it's the same with gaming. So when you think of what, you know, your standard average gamer is, and there's a large majority of people who, you know, when you really get down to it, they would look at ReCore and maybe think it was going to be a first-person shooter, and then when they get it, it might be something that completely doesn't, you know, relate to them at all, because they don't know what it means. But if you're a person who has played, you know, all the history of games like this, like, does anybody remember Apocalypse on the PlayStation? Back in the day, you played as Bruce Willis, and it was kind of an on-rails, Smash TV-esque shooting platformer game. This is far, far more advanced than that game, but if you've played those kind of games from that moment on and you've gone through things like everybody compares this to Ratchet and Clank, and I've played a little bit of those games, and I understand the comparison, but I think that not only are they a better series because they're cohesive and they work on a game design perspective, but additionally, it's a series that people have a lot of love for, and I find it difficult to compare anything to a series when you only have one example of it. It's just one of those personal things that I don't like to do, even though we're all guilty of doing it. But people have compared it to, just platformers, things like Jak and Daxter, which I can understand to a degree. There's the collecting aspect, there's the precursors orbs and things. But Jak and Daxter is a full-fledged, awesome game. Don't get me wrong, if you played it now, you might be like, wow, this has not aged gracefully, but it might have. At the time when I played it back on the PS2, that game was the shit. That was the next extension of Crash Bandicoot, and it was a big jump in quality. And there was a lot of games like that in that period. Like, this game reminds me a lot of Jet Force Gemini. If you ever played that on the N64, where there's quite a lot of shooting in it, but the core element of it is the platforming and the collecting. But once again, Jet Force Gemini is a better game than this. It might not have aged gracefully when it comes to the controls, because when I tried to play it on the Rare Collection, it was like smashing the pad into my face, because my brain was just like, nope, games have changed. This does not work anymore. I'm not holding an N64 pad, this is confusing. And I did struggle, but you can see the origins of this kind of title, and if you're a person who plays a lot of games, buys a lot of games, and stays in touch with what games are coming out and gaming news, you're not an average gamer. You're somebody who's above that. And I don't mean above that as in a better way, just you're more interested. You're not the football fan that watches a few games on the TV and uses it as an excuse to have a beer with the friends. You're the guy who's got a season ticket and goes to the games. Like, you're in there, you're interested, and you're passionate. And if you come from that lineage of those kind of games, when you come to ReCore, I wish this game was better. You're going to wonder, like, should they have focused on one, should they have focused on another? A lot of these design decisions turn up that are confusing. Like this one right now. I've just triggered this sphere, and it's put me into a fight against these blue enemies. The blue enemies, these standard wolf enemies, are not that challenging. But if they decide to cheese you, they can be really, really, really difficult for no other reason than the game just every so often decides to bum you. And you'll notice your life doesn't regenerate until after a slight while, so you can get put into these really tough situations, and the game has a jump and a dodge, but neither feel like they're acceptable in how you can get away from attacks. Did you notice how I was trying to get away from the wolf, but all the wolf did was just keep up with me and wait for me to land, and then it hit me? Because there doesn't feel like there's a cohesive way to get things away from you, or to get space from things. So you have this dodge, but all it is an extension of the platforming, because in the action, it doesn't dodge anything. And the more you play the game, it doesn't get easier to assess it and to dodge better. You just appreciate that there's no fucking point, because it's always going to be beneath me. So one of the things that I noticed, which worked quite well, but still got me bit every so often, is when I saw that those wolves rushing, and I knew I was going to land on them, instead of backing up and trying to get away from them, I would boost towards them to try and throw them off. And it kind of works, sometimes it doesn't, but it's just another one of those designs that is going to confuse a lot of people playing. And to bring it back to the inventory, you might wonder what's the problem with the inventory being full. Well, it brings us back to the loading, because the only way you can get rid of your inventory, you can't pause it and send a bunch of shit back to the crawler, you can't give it to your buddy to hold it, you can't hit one of the fast travel points and dump it all off on your friend Violet. You have to physically go back to the crawler, which is a load time in itself to get there. And then once you finish doing it, it's a load time to get out. So every time your inventory fills, not only do you feel like you're being redundant then because you can't get more powerful items and you can't get any more cores, but you feel obliged to come back to what is essentially a linear progression of load times, and load times that are completely unacceptable. So you have this wonderful loot and crafting system that is all tied directly to the most miserable aspect of the game. And I don't understand how, in today's day and age, this gets made. Games, because the technology now has gone so far and has been developed so vastly, we're not at the point now where oh, did you see that? That was one of the charge attacks. And did you see how it left a trail of fire? That means that it's RNG triggered and it did its ability. So whenever you see anybody doing a charge move like that, if you can spot it in time and lock on, if you hit them with the anchor, you'll interrupt them. But once again, the anchor mechanic, incredibly frustrating. the anchor can be countered by the enemies and it does damage to you. It also locks you into an animation that you can't cancel and that is a little bit too long for my tastes. You'd think, because you're actively doing it, you wouldn't be penalised in a way that you are. For instance, now, if I try to hook one of these people, it won't work and they'll break the anchor, and Jewel will even say it needs to be weaker, you need to do more damage to it, because, of course, those white lines on its health bar, those two, like, pegs that point inward, they haven't been breached, so it won't let me do it just yet. And when you do it then, I can appreciate you being punished for it. But when you do it to stop an enemy, you would think there would be more feedback and it would be a faster animation. Because you're not doing it by accident. You're not misinterpreting the rules or misunderstanding the mechanic. You know what you want to do, and you're doing it correctly, but you still don't feel like the game is giving you your due. And it's little things like this that add together to take away the power and the fun of playing the game. And it doesn't make sense. Games are being more accessible. Games are making it easier for players, and not all of the changes that have been applied to modern games are bad. You know, we've got rid of the waiting. We've got rid of the stuff that you did that wasn't fun. And don't get me wrong, we've also got rid of a lot of stuff that some people thought were good, some people didn't. Like miscellaneous platforming. Insert generic random puzzles that don't really fit the game, but they gave it a little bit of spice. You know, completely out of nowhere against everything else in the game, driving sections or on-rail sections. And we've got to the point where we've seen every single iteration of these things, and we're kind of bored with it. This is the dungeon, by the way. This is the Cavern Rush section of the video. I believe Cavern Rush is it an adventure? Because there are 3 types of dungeon. There are a combat dungeon, there are traversal dungeons, and there are adventure dungeons. The first 2 are self-explanatory and quite short. The adventure ones are usually a little bit longer with a mixture of the 2. This looks like a traversal dungeon, because whenever you hit this it means it's going to start the timer. Yeah, this is a traversal dungeon. So, these are the parts where ReCore really shines. This is the moment when you're going to be transported back to that tricky level in Crash Bandicoot or Banjo-Kazooie or, Mario 64, whichever platformer that really resonated with you when you were younger and you got to a point where, wow, this got tough. Well, that's what these are, only you are so capable in this game, you're probably not going to have too many issues. But this is where it really shows that it can do platforming. It really shows that platforming can be good. It can be old school but modern enough that anybody could enjoy this. And if you're a person that approaches this game like I approach the Dynasty Warriors stuff, where I sit down immediately on my mind thinking this is boring as fuck, I can't enjoy this, then maybe you won't like this. Maybe you'll come to this and think, well, is all this we're doing, jumping between platforms? And if you look at the game from that perspective, you might not enjoy it. And I get that completely. However, if you're a gamer who's come from all the first-person shooters and all you really play sports games and you're branching out, when you look at this, you might be like, wow, I've never seen anything like this. And it's that type of culmination of skills that you pick up when you're playing games that you don't realise that you're picking up. Oh, watch this, by the way. See that? Normally I would remove these, because that's kind of how I do walkthroughs, but in the dungeons, look how fast that was. That was as fast as, say, the Uncharted collection. Look at it, boom. And we're back in the game. That is an acceptable load. But the only times this happens is in these dungeons. And outside the world, you're looking at anywhere between 50 seconds to 3 minutes. And I wish I was being hyperbolic when I say 3 minutes, but on the editing timeline, it was like 2 minute 40. And that's too long. That's a load to load all loads. That's like a Grand Theft Auto load, and then you never saw one, did you? Like, it's completely unacceptable and amazing that happens that way. This is a health pickup, by the way. You can get health boosts, which will give Jewel an extended life bar, make her a little bit tougher to kill. But once again, guys, I kind of feel like the health system is completely undermined in this game and not really necessary, because the only times that you are truly at risk are 100% surprise moments where everything decides to do what it was meant to do from the beginning and does it perfectly, and a lot of the times you can't really recover because you've never been faced with that kind of lethality before, and a lot of it involves being stunned. And if you get stunned and you don't realise that when you get set on fire, it hinders your mobility, you're going to try and jump or dash, and there are times when it doesn't let you until you've got rid of whatever's happening to you. And you just kind of press the buttons and you're like, why is it not happening? And then you're dead. So those moments are going to be, oh, I fell. Always fun. But something to bear in mind on these little challenge moments. Do you see how it's the secondary objectives and it has the time limit, it has the key pickup, and it has the shoot the I can't read what it says, it's too blurry, but I think it's switches. If you do all 3 of these on one run, look how close I was to that too. That's depressing. If I'd not fucked up on that super easy jump at the beginning, I'd have got every single reward here. And the only benefit to getting all the rewards is you get generally a really cool piece of kit for your employees, as I like to call them, which is that middle chest there. It will generally be a full outfit that is quite high level, or if not high leveled, it will be high powered. And that's what a lot of these dungeons do. You go through the main world, you find these dungeons, you go inside, and the dungeons are instanced, that's why the loads are fast. And then you do these objectives, and each one of the objectives gives you a different reward. There's one for beating it in the time limit, there's one for getting the yellow key, and there's one for hitting all the switches. And then if you do all 3 in one run, you get the bonus one, which is probably the highest tier of whatever's in that room. And these are exciting, these are fun. I really like these. Some of them take some learning, and if you want to get all 3 on one run, you have to study them. You have to learn the positions of things, so there is some replayability and there is some skill that's demanded of you, and I really think these moments make this game shine. The problem is, they're shoehorned into a campaign that is far too spread thin. Like, there's no reason for this game to be this massive open world collectathon when it didn't start off that way. And this game is at its best when it's giving you these linear sequences. And I always find it funny how games can essentially miss the point of what makes them good by diluting themselves into something that they think will appeal to the biggest possible market, and then all they do is make pariahs of the people who liked what they were doing before. Like in that dungeon just then, it's really fun, because it's you. You're not fucking with the load times, you're not fucking with a massive open world where you're running across a desert wondering what you're going to find, and then you get to a point where there is no to find except for a nice radiation death if you don't pay attention. Like, it's just distilled, it's raw, it's exactly what it needs to be from a gameplay perspective. It's you versus the environment. It's timing, it's precision, it's great. And then you come back outside and it goes back to the open world exploration, which, don't get me wrong, it has its merits, but you're not going to face any kind of jumping demands that you found inside that place just then. And out here, it feels like autopilot. So in a lot of ways, the two principles coming together of tight platforming and interesting dungeon design mixed with this open world Borderlands-esque hub world, they conflict each other because each of them diminishes the value of the other one. So if you come to this game and you're really liking the exploring and you're really liking being able to climb up on the rocks and find hidden chests and kill these enemies and just really get into the exploration aspect of the world, when you get to those dungeons, those platforming sections are probably going to kick your ass, because it's not what you've come to the game for. And each one mixes it up, so you'll have one of those challenging platforming ones, and then you'll have a combat one, where it's way more combat than you used to, all in one. And don't get me wrong, they're not going to be massively demanding of you, because the game just isn't. But there are instances where it's just like Left 4 Dead. Can you remember those moments in Left 4 Dead where the smoker synchronized with the hunter, synchronized with the boomer, synchronized with the tank, and before you know it, your entire team's separated and getting gangbanged, and you're just like, what the hell happened? Where did that come from? It's just like that. So then you put the subtitles on and you can see them all before you actually see them, because it says, boomer gurgled and all that silly shit, which unfortunately doesn't apply here. But I'm showing you a little bit of the map right now, and do you notice how each of the dungeon symbols have a gold circle next to them? That's because to get to the next sequence in the game, it wants me to collect prismatic cores, and this is the first inclination that maybe these cores are important to progress. And at the moment, all it seems like is they lock the dungeons, so you can be mistaken to believe that the cores are just a safety mechanic to stop you going too far into the game and getting your ass kicked, but that's not how they work. There are 2 barriers to entry. First one is the level, second one is the cores, and this is actually a boss fight coming up just now. It's up against your first, I think they're called AP3 robots, which essentially means that they are styled over a gorilla. So show your Harambe love, and you'll also notice this guy is purple, so you will never get a purple colour for an affinity, but what you want to do is you want to swap between the colours that you do have and see whichever one does purple damage numbers. Whichever does purple damage numbers correlates to what he's weakest to, and that's what you want to attack him with. And if you happen to have a buddy with you who's the same colour as the damage that he's weak to, their lethal attacks will do great damage. And it's another one of those factors to the combat and how it evolves, where not only can you have the same affinity to damage the enemies, but if you swap between your buddies to the correct colour, you can also double damage that way. And it feels like there's a combat puzzle here that's just waiting to be tapped into, that never gets the full gestation or the catalyst to make it what it needed to be to carry a game. But thank you for watching, and you take care now.